Hello everyone! Welcome to our English lesson where we will be talking about connected speech. When we speak naturally, we do not pronounce a word, stop, then say the next word in the sentence. Fluent speech flows with the rhythm and the words bump into each other. To make speech flow smoothly, the way we pronounce the end and beginning of some words can change depending on the sounds at the beginning and end of those words. In connected speech, words or syllables are clipped, phrases are run together, and words are stressed differently than they would be in writing. One of the characteristics of connected speech is the deletion or clipping of sounds that occurs when words run together. Here's some examples. Want to can become wanna. Going to can become gonna. Rock and roll can become rock and roll. And them can become em or dem in connected speech. These are very informal usages of common words that most often occur in casual conversation, so they would probably not be present in formal speech or writing. Native speakers take many verbal shortcuts in ordinary conversation that wouldn't be present in written English, and switching between written and spoken English takes getting used to when it isn't your first language. These challenges are not exclusive to English. In Spanish, many words begin and end in vowels, and these tend to meld together in speech. The polite greeting, ¿Cómo está? How are you? Often sounds like ¿Cómo está? When spoken, with little to no pause between the words. When speaking to someone who isn't a native speaker, enunciation is helpful. You can also help them to understand you by speaking more slowly and pausing slightly between each word. Here are some common types and examples of connected speech. Let's start with number 1, catenation or linking. Catenation happens when a consonant sound at the end of one word gets attached to the first vowel sound at the beginning of the following word. For example, when native speakers say an apple, you'll usually hear them say an apple, an apple, an apple. The N in an gets joined with the A sound in apple, and it becomes almost like a single word. In some cases, the sound of the consonant sound changes when it's linked. For example, if I were to say that orange, you will probably hear me change the final consonant T sound to a D sound, as in that orange, that orange, that orange. Here are some other examples. Trip over often sounds like trip over, trip over, trip over. Hang out often sounds like hangout, hangout, hangout. Clean up often sounds like clean up, clean up, clean up. Now we'll go to number 2, intrusion. Intrusion happens when an extra sound squishes in between two words. The intruding sound is often a J, W, or R. For example, we often say, he asked, more like he asked, he asked, he asked. Or do it, more like do it, do it, do it. Another example, there is, more like there is, there is, there is. Now let's go to the third example, elision. Elision happens when the last sound of a word disappears. This often happens with T and D sounds. For example, next door often gets shortened to next door, next door, next door. Another example, most common often gets shortened to most common, most common, most common. Now let's look at another point, assimilation. Assimilation happens when sounds blend together to make an entirely new sound. Let's look at a few examples. Don't you getting blended into don't you, don't you, don't you. Meet you. This gets blended into meet you, meet you, meet you. Did you? This can get blended into did you, did you, did you. Now let's go to another point, Geminids. Geminids are a doubled or long consonant sound. In connected speech, when a first word ends with the same consonant sound that the next word begins with, we often put the sounds together and elongate them. Let's look at a few examples. Single ladies turns into single ladies, single ladies, single ladies. Social life turns into social life, social life, social life. Notice that in none of these cases does the spelling actually change. It's just the sounds that change when we say them. So that's our lesson for today on connected speech. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Bye! Hello and welcome to today's lesson where we will learn about weak forms. These words have no stress and so they are weakened. That weakened form is called weak form as opposed to a strong form, which is the full form of the word pronounced with stress. The strong form only happens when we pronounce the words alone or when we emphasize them. Weak forms are very often pronounced with a schwa type of sound, and so are very weak and sometimes a bit difficult to hear properly. Let's go over some examples. First example, and. Fish and chips. To say this naturally, you wouldn't say fish and chips, but you would change it to fish and chips. Fish and chips, fish and chips, fish and chips. Second example, a chair and a table. You would say this, a chair and a table, a chair and a table, a chair and a table, a chair and a table. Third example, can. She can speak Spanish better than I can. The first can is the weak form. The second can is the full form. Fourth example, of. A pint of beer. A pint of beer. A pint of beer. A pint of beer. That's the last of the wine. 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 Fifth example, have. Have you finished? Have you finished? Have you finished? Have you finished? This have is weak. Let's go up to another one. Yes, I have. This have is full. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Sixth example. Should. Well, you should have told me. Both should and have are weak here. You should have told me. Sometimes weak forms are easy to spot because we use contractions in the spelling to show it. Some examples. I am French. This is the strong form. I'm French. This is the weak form. But usually there is no change of spelling, only the pronunciation is different. An example is the word but. But, the strong form, but. The weak form, but. But. Another example. Tell him to go. The strong forms, him to. The weak form, tell him to go. Tell him to go. As you can see, the grammatical words him and to are unstressed and have a weak form when pronounced inside a sentence. Let's go with another example. I would like some fish and chips. Strong form, I would like some fish and chips. This version sounds unnatural and, believe it or not, more difficult to understand for a native speaker. Now let's go with the weak forms. I would like some fish and chips. And we can use weaker forms sometimes. Example, I'd like some fish and chips. I'd like some fish and chips. So we can see that the auxiliary verb would has two weak forms, would and d. That's the lesson for today on weak forms. I hope you have learned a lot and that you enjoyed it. Bye!